I was at the border recently in California, and it's a well-oiled cartel-run machine where I stood there and I watched hundreds of people come across the border. They knew exactly where to go. Border Patrol would go and run their pickups, essentially serving as a glorified Uber driver. They go and get processed. They get a piece of paper and they're on a plane anywhere they want to go in the country in about 24 hours.
Yeah.
Border Patrol is their leadership is running a very tight ship. Any one of them who speaks out will be retaliated against, without a doubt. And yet they are in a position where they cannot even do their job because of the Biden-Harris administration.
Does it seem very obvious to you now? Like now when I look back on my journey now, I'm like, oh, it was clearly going to end up here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you feel similarly.
Yeah. And it was people tell me like, well, I saw you on the stage in the 2020 Democratic debate. And I was like, why is she a Democrat? She doesn't, one of these is not like the other.
Yeah.
And questioning, well, what took you so long? For me, it was going through, I served for 8 years in Congress. I was vice chair of the Democratic National Committee. I ran for president in the Democratic primary. And in each of those roles and positions, I held out hope and put my effort and energy toward actually trying to be constructive and bringing positive change to the Democratic Party and trying to get it to the place where it was when I joined over 20 years ago as a 21-year-old in Hawaii. To be a party of the little guy, to be the big open tent free speech party, the party that at that time had the ACLU standing up for free speech and standing up for civil liberties and bringing people from all different backgrounds together. And it was different things over time, but especially in that presidential primary, that it became tremendously clear to me that the Democrat elite have zero interest in being the traditional liberal party of JFK, of being a party that is actually trying to live out the dream of Martin Luther King. They had not only they have no interest, they actively attacked and smeared and tried to silence me for having the audacity to do that.
And did it in the most obnoxious possible ways. I mean, Hillary Clinton, while you were the last one running against Biden, basically everyone else cut their deals to either get in the administration or whatever it was to drop out before Super Tuesday. Hillary Clinton, I think, went on The View, if I'm not mistaken, and said, basically you're a Putin stooge, or she didn't even say your name, right?
No.
She said like the other one.
Yeah, it was actually a David Axel. She was on David Axelrod's podcast. She's probably did it on The View as well.
Yeah.
But I think the first time she talked about me was publicly was on David Axelrod's podcast, and without saying my name, essentially said the Russians were grooming me, and so on, saying that I'm a traitor to my country. And there were a couple of news outlets that reached out to her after, or her campaign her spokesperson saying, well, you didn't mention a name. Who are you talking about? Are you talking about Tulsi Gabbard? And there was some snarky, stupid reply from her spokesperson that essentially confirmed it. And to have former Secretary of State, former Democratic nominee, former U.S. Senator, former First Lady, take the time and space out of her life and schedule to make that point was a very clear signal to me, and even more powerfully to anyone else who dared to support me or dared to be like, more of us should stand up against her neocon, neolib warmongering. More of us should stand up against the corrupt machine of politics in Washington that cares more for power than they do for the people. Anyone who challenges so directly the Democrat elite machine, of which Hillary Clinton is, the leader of,
right.
Here's what will happen to you. We will come after you and we will try to destroy you.
Right. And what was interesting about it to me was that it was purely punitive because he was going to be the nominee at that point. I mean, you were still in, but they had already done the thing. So she was clearly going after you to say, oh, if you leave us, the example we're going to make of Tulsi is what we'll do to all of you guys.
Yeah.
So if you don't think that you're having left the party, or if you see that as inevitable, do you think the destruction or what has now happened to the Democrat Party was inevitable? Was there a moment that they could have stopped this? Had Biden maybe picked you instead of Kamala? Could that have done something to shift, even whether you would have accepted or not? But was there any correction that could have happened before they went off the deep end?
Sure. I think there were certainly a number of moments and kind of forks in the road where they could have chosen a different path to, for example, find ways to bring the country together rather than, the speech that President Biden gave in Philadelphia. At Independence Hall. The moment was there, the setting was there, the opportunity was there for him to, I think he was maybe a year after he was sworn in, the opportunity was there to deliver a very unifying speech. This was in the lead up to the 2022 election.
Yeah.
And, there was a small little sliver of hope that okay, if for no other reason than for purely political tactics in winning more seats in Congress in this 2022 election, maybe this will be a moment he will actually try to bring the country together. And I talk about this in my book. He did the exact opposite.
It might be the most divisive speech I've ever heard in my life.
I completely agree. And that is probably one of the biggest, but one of many of those lost opportunities. And this was why when I withdrew from the presidential campaign, why I made that decision to endorse Joe Biden, in the hopes that if he were elected president, at a minimum, I could be in a place and have an opportunity to provide some kind of influence to him, because I've known him for a long time, that I could provide some kind of influence to him to listen to his better angels, to be a more common sense minded leader, to be, the Uncle Joe that was able to bring people together around different issues, who could actually unite a heavily divided country. And unfortunately, at every step along the way, from his inauguration going forward, he chose the path of darkness and divisiveness and hate.
What has happened to the liberals? Because I know that even you and I have, I would say, probably some differences, maybe on the margins a little bit. I think you've shifted on some things over the years. I've shifted on some things. It doesn't even matter. I mean, we can get into them, but it really doesn't even matter. I think what both of us roughly represent is what most Americans represent. Yeah. And that used to be the liberal position. And then some people maybe had more conservative religious views, something like that. But the liberals have basically been just annihilated at this point. I think it's very dangerous for America, actually.
It is.
The real liberals, obviously, I'm talking about.
The traditional liberals of the great leaders from our country's past.
What do you think happened? I mean, was it inevitable in a weird way?
I don't believe that it was inevitable. I try to be optimistic and I try to be hopeful, and what I saw over the years that I served in Congress was increasingly the Democratic Party was catering towards the most extreme, loud elements within their base of support. I think it's best embodied today by the Squad, and made decisions out of fear of retaliation from that constituency, fear of loss of power. Ultimately, is kind of the major motivating factor in the decisions that they're making, because the positions they're taking, whether you talk about, the trans ideology, whether you talk about, defund the police and how crime and an undermining of the rule of law is taking over our country. You see what's happening on these college campuses. You look at our open borders. I was at the border recently in California, and it's a well-oiled cartel-run machine, where I stood there and I watched hundreds of people come across the border. They knew exactly where to go. Border Patrol would go and run their pickups, essentially serving as a glorified Uber driver. They go and get processed. They get a piece of paper, and they're on a plane anywhere they want to go in the country in about 24 hours.
Yeah.
Border Patrol is their leadership is running a very tight ship. Any one of them who speaks out will be retaliated against, without a doubt, and yet they are in a position where they cannot even do their job because of the Biden-Harris administration. and the Democrat elite. So you look at these different examples, any common sense minded American can say like, well, this is crazy.
Yeah.
If you're a political operative, you look at this, you're like, well, these are not common sense positions. They make no sense from anyone's standpoint, regardless of party politics. And yet this is what they're doing.
So you believe it to be more calculated than just incompetence, right? That seems to be the new debate that everyone's having, or maybe they just don't, they kind of don't know what they're doing with crime and drugs and border. And I don't believe it either, but
it goes far beyond incompetence.
So then
you can see you might be able to say, oh, well, gosh, they made a mistake here or there that could be attributed to incompetence. But we have seen now consistently throughout his entire administration over these last 3.5 years, consistently pushing policies that undermine our freedom, that make our country less safe and less secure, and that is very quickly unraveling and destroying the foundational, fundamental elements of our country and what it means to be an American here. That has to be intentional.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about politics instead of nonstop screaming, check out our politics playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist, all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.